There was no warning, no storm, no enemy, no scream. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole. The police searched for days. Families pleaded. Newspapers screamed headlines. 2 youths vanish in the forest. But was vanish really the right word? Because their tent was still there. Their bags were open. The fire was still burning. And on the ground, there was no sign of a struggle. That file gathered dust on the shelves for years, until someone saw something out there and went to the police. That's when it became clear. The story didn't end here. There was something beneath the forest, and that something is still there. Before we dive into the depths of the story, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's begin. On the last days of autumn, the forest was quieter and darker than usual. The trees seemed to be hiding a secret beneath their brown bark. When the wind blew, the whispers threading through the branches sank deep into anyone who listened. That morning, when Deputy Sheriff Michael Kerr's phone rang, the town was still shrouded in mist. The woman on the other end could barely push the words out of her throat. "My nephew and his girlfriend went hiking in Timber Creek Forest yesterday afternoon. They still haven't come back." Michael thought it was just another routine missing persons case. The town was often full of hikers from the city. Some lost their way, some stayed out too late. Most of the time, they'd wave and come back the next morning. Still, he followed procedure. When he reached the office at 7:30 a.m., the town's lone patrol car was waiting, its blue lights cutting faintly through the fog. When Michael met the young man's mother, her name was Helen, her hands were trembling. The missing kids were Zachary and Emily, a 22-year-old college student and the girlfriend he'd been with since high school. The last place they'd been seen was at the north entrance trail of Timber Creek. As Helen crumpled the map in her hands, she turned to Michael and said, "They're responsible kids. Not texting last night. That's not like them." Michael tried to calm her and set off into the woods with a few volunteers. Under the pines, the ground was carpeted with rotten leaves, and at every step the smell of damp earth rose around them. They started with the trail. The couple's car was still in the parking lot. A red hatchback, water bottles on the back seat, a map on the dashboard, as if they'd be back any moment. But as the hours passed, as the mist lifted and the sun rose, a knot began to form in Michael's stomach. Because about 2 kilometers in, where the path forked, there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no dropped belongings. By noon, one of the volunteers came running back, shouting, "There's something here!" Michael sprinted toward the voice, and he saw it, deeper in the woods, a small campsite among the trees. A tent was pitched, red and grey, its fabric intact, its zipper open. Inside, it was nearly orderly. 2 sleeping bags, some open snack wrappers, a flashlight. The fire pit still looked like it was faintly smoking. Michael crouched and touched the ashes with his finger. They were cool, but the embers were soft, extinguished maybe only a few hours ago. Helen's face went pale. This is their tent." Michael circled it. Nothing suggested a struggle, panic, or hasty departure, but somehow everything looked wrong. Too neat, too quiet. Then he noticed the birds. There weren't any. Since morning, not a single chirp, not a rustle, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Michael took a step back and gazed into the trees. The darkness between them seemed to flow like liquid. For a moment, he could have sworn he saw movement, but there was no one there. When he knelt in the dirt behind the tent, he found a set of footprints. Boots. But they weren't small, too big to belong to Zachary or Emily, and heavy, pressed so deep into the soil that the edges had cracked. Michael turned to the volunteers. "Stay here. Don't let anyone leave. I'm calling the forest patrol." But when he pulled out his phone to check the signal, the screen only said, "No service." By the time it neared 4 p.m., The sky darkened suddenly. Clouds gathered, forming a grey ceiling over the trees. One volunteer rubbed his hands and whispered, "I think we should head back. This doesn't feel right." But Michael didn't turn back. He followed the tracks. Each step led him deeper. Branches snapped under his boots, each crack splintering the silence a little more. About a kilometre later, he found a second site. This time, no tent. But on the ground, stones arranged in a perfect circle, and in the middle, a blackened stain, traces of something burned. And in the very centre of the stones, a t-shirt, the one Emily wore in her photos. White, with tiny floral patterns, torn, its edge stained with soot. Michael knelt. On the t-shirt lay a note, a single sheet of white paper, one word written on it, "Over." Just then, the first raindrops fell from the sky. Michael turned back quickly toward the others. The wind howled through the forest, and as branches clashed high above, he thought he heard a scream far in the distance. He froze, listening, but it was just the wind. When he got back to the campsite, it was empty. The tent was still there, but the volunteers were gone. Michael's heart hammered. He looked around, calling their names. No answer, only the wind. He glanced at his phone again. The screen was black. Battery still showed 72%, but no button responded. And in the dead screen's reflection, he saw a shadow move behind him. He spun around. Nothing, but from the ground, a voice whispered, "Not over." Michael stumbled back, his feet tangled beneath him. He tumbled into the forest. As the smell of damp earth filled his lungs, he looked up and saw something swinging from the branches. A pair of shoes, shoelaces tied to a rope. At the end of the rope, a body. Michael opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came. Then he saw it. Movement beneath the leaves, the earth itself shifting. As if the forest was alive, as if it was watching him. Scrambling to his feet, he fumbled for his flashlight, switched it on, and just then, the beam of light revealed more tents standing between the trees, at least 5 of them, all freshly pitched. In front of each, a note. On each note, the same word, "Over." But now Michael knew it wasn't over. One sentence echoed in Michael's mind. It wasn't over. As his eyes drifted over the tents, his throat went dry. They were all lined up the same way, flaps slightly open, canvas taut, no sign of life inside. The notes pinned in front of them had grown heavy and clung to the fabric under the cold rain. Over. But as he looked closer at the word, he noticed, along the edges of the papers, something else had been scratched in with fingernails. He leaned in. The rain was already threatening to wash it away. On the note farthest to the right, carved with a thin, bloody line, it read, "No one escapes." Michael staggered back, his foot catching on a root, his knees sinking into the mud. As he glanced around, he noticed the earth around the tents was darker than normal, as though that patch had never seen daylight. After the volunteers had vanished, Michael felt alien to his own voice. He couldn't even hear his own breath anymore. He wanted to scream, but his throat felt tied shut with a cruel knot. His stomach churned as his eyes caught something near the roots of a tree, just a few meters away. A glove. Small, with faint streaks of blood. Small enough to have belonged to Emily. When he picked it up, a shiver ran down his spine, so cold it felt like ice cracking in his bones. There was something about the glove, a hatred stitched into its fabric. He dropped it quickly. The rain was no longer a drizzle, but a violent downpour now, the ground turning into a mire. As Michael slowly backed away, trying to make his way back to the trail, he noticed markings etched into the trunks of the trees. At first, they made no sense. Triangles, circles, lines. But they were arranged in a deliberate pattern, each accompanied by a date. And at the very bottom, freshly cut, was today's date, November 12th. Something broke inside him. as though that date was meant to be his last too. Suddenly, a sharp crack behind him. He swung his light toward it. The beam sputtered, blinked, then steadied, and what he saw froze the blood in his veins. Some 20 meters away, someone in a black jacket stood motionless, hood drawn low. Michael called out with a trembling voice, "Hey, who are you?" But no answer came. The figure, whatever it was, stood unmoving, hands in its pockets, head bowed. When Michael took a step forward, the hooded figure took one forward too. He backed up. It advanced. The distance between them shrank with each breath. And finally, when the light fell on its face, there was no face. Beneath the hood was nothing but a black void. Michael turned and bolted. Mud slid beneath his boots, branches whipped at his face. He didn't look back. He didn't dare imagine what he might see. As he ran, he tried to find the trail again, but with each step, the forest seemed to conspire against him. The trees grew thicker, the branches lower, the roots more tangled. His breath came in ragged gasps. At some point, he realized he was back where the tents stood. The forest had trapped him in a circle. The tents were still there, but now their doors were wide open, and from each one, black smoke was curling out. With shaking hands, Michael grabbed his radio. "Base, base, do you copy? I'm in Timber Creek. I need backup." But all that came back was a low hiss of static, then a whisper, "Don't let go." The voice in his ear made him scream. He flung the radio into the mud. Something inside him screamed, "Don't," but his eyes betrayed him. He stepped toward one of the tents, peering inside. Darkness swallowed his gaze whole. Inside, laid out like a tablecloth, was a sheet of black fabric, and on it, another note. This time, just one word: wait. When Michael looked up, a pair of eyes stared down at him from the tent's ceiling. Red, bloodshot, slowly being pulled upward, like a corpse strung up by invisible ropes. Michael stumbled out into the rain, knees sinking into the mud. Now he understood. The forest was never going to let them go. Escape? He tried one last time to reach the path. Running, shadows slithered across the trees, black hands reaching out from behind branches. With each step, the earth seemed to clutch at him, trying to swallow him whole. Suddenly, a massive boulder loomed before him. He pressed his hands against it, gasping, and then he noticed the stone was warm. Under his fingers, something was etched into it in raised letters. Wrong turn. Michael's eyes widened. Thin smoke began to rise from behind the rock, and then a scream. At first, faint as a whisper, then loud enough to tear through his skull. Michael clamped his hands over his ears, but the screaming came from everywhere. The trees themselves seemed to howl. The earth seemed to shake. When he opened his eyes, Zachary stood before him. But this wasn't Zachary. His eyes were empty, skin bone white, lips cracked. Michael cried out, "What happened to you?" But from Zachary's lips came only one sentence: "You can't go back." And with the sound of dozens of footsteps rising from the depths of the forest, the hooded figure reappeared. But this time, it wasn't alone. Helen was with it, eyes closed, lips purple, as though being led. Michael stood frozen in place, breathless. The hooded figure approached, dragging Helen along, its face still a void, but what it held out in its hand made Michael's knees buckle. Emily's necklace, coated in blood. Michael recoiled. I didn't want this. I just wanted to find them." But the hooded figure said nothing. It simply shoved the necklace into his pocket and leaned toward Helen's ear, whispered something. Helen raised her head and whispered, "We are the forest now." All at once, the sound stopped. The hooded figure pulled back and dissolved into smoke. When Michael blinked, everything looked normal again. The tents were gone. The smoke was gone. Only the rain and the forest remained, but the necklace in his pocket was still there. and pinned to the tree beside him was a fresh note. "You're on next." Michael lifted his head, and from the deepest part of the forest came one more scream. Michael was still there, the bloody necklace in his pocket, the weight of mud on his knees, and that scream still echoing in his ears. The rain had stopped some time ago, but each drop falling from the branches above startled him like the tolling of a clock. The tents were gone now. The trail was gone. All that remained were the trees, their branches locked together in a strange web-like pattern. And the air was so heavy it was almost unbreathable. He took a deep breath. "I'll get out of here," he whispered to himself, then louder, trying to drown the fear. "I'll get out of here. I will." But the sounds rising from the forest, there was no way to explain them. Everything was wrong. The branches rustled without wind. Unseen things slithered beneath the ground, and footsteps echoed, though no one could be seen. Michael picked a direction and started walking. Every few steps he looked back, and each time the gaps between the trees seemed narrower. After a while, he realized, no matter how far he walked, he kept passing the same tree over and over. He knew it because of the dark, blood-like stain on its trunk, and each time it seemed just a little bigger. Finally, he stumbled into a clearing. The grass there reached up to his knees. In the center stood a single tent, but this time it was white, pure white. A strange light glowed from inside. Michael approached cautiously. Now he was walking on tiptoe, as though the slightest sound would anger the forest. When he touched the flap of the tent, a delicate melody rose from within. Piano music. He pulled the flap aside and froze. The tent looked tiny from outside, but stepping in, he found himself in the middle of a vast, endless hall surrounded by darkness. No walls, no ceiling, but on the floor stood an old piano, and someone was sitting at it. Emily. Michael's heart nearly burst from his chest. "Emily!" he cried. But Emily kept playing without lifting her head. Her fingers were bleeding. With each note, the keys were smeared with blood. At last, she looked up. Her eyes were black. "You can't leave, Daddy," she said. Michael's throat went dry. "Emily, I'm taking you with me, I promise." But Emily only smiled, and the melody she played suddenly rose into a shrill, screaming pitch. The piano strings began to snap. As Michael backed away, the darkness surged over him like a wave, and then he was outside again. The tent was gone. The white grass had burned away, leaving only blackened earth. And then he saw them, dozens, maybe hundreds of hooded figures, clinging to the tree trunks, camouflaged like bark, all watching him. One by one, they slowly turned their heads and whispered in unison, "Wrong turn." Michael began backing away, but the ground cracked open. Roots burst from beneath, wrapping around his legs. The trees looked as if they'd been gnawed on, their splintered trunks leaning toward him like jagged teeth. Michael screamed, "It's over! Let me go!" But the forest roared back. There was no wind. Yet the branches snapped, trunks splintered, the earth growled. And Michael understood at last. This was not just a forest. It was a mouth. And it had teeth. Falling to his knees, Michael noticed a notebook lying on the ground, caked in mud but still open. Helen's journal. With trembling hands, he began to read. November 12th. I'm no longer sure what's happening. Emily whispers to me every night. Zachary's face is gone. Michael still doesn't understand. The forest wanted all of us, and now it has us all. The journal slipped from his hands. He covered his face. His breath felt like ice. No. But when he looked up, Helen stood right in front of him. She was no longer the woman he knew. Her hair was wild, her eyes hollow, black liquid dripping from her lips. And she whispered, "This is our grave now, Michael. Yours too." Michael recoiled, but a hand shot out of the earth and clamped around his ankle. He fell face first. As he scrambled to his feet, the hooded figures stepped closer. All at once, they raised their arms. From the sky, black smoke began to descend. Only one voice echoed in Michael's mind now. Emily's. "You can't escape." And then the screams, thousands of screams, from every tree, every root, every stone. Human, animal, and something else entirely. Something that had never lived. Michael raised his eyes to the sky and saw the stars going out one by one. The ground was collapsing beneath him when a fissure opened at his feet, a crack into infinite darkness. The hooded figure stepped forward, still faceless, but this time holding Michael's own necklace. It extended it toward him, the metal now etched with a new word: surrender. Michael reached out and took it. And in that instant, the forest fell silent. The screaming stopped like a blade had cut it off, but one whisper remained: "Stay with us." Michael bowed his head. His fingers traced the letters carved into the necklace: surrender. And for the first time, he had never felt so tired. With the necklace in hand, he stood up, looked at the hooded figure. "You want me, don't you?" he said. The figure lowered its head. Michael took a deep breath and stepped toward the darkness. But before he could take his second step, a voice rang out behind him, a child's voice. "Daddy, please, don't go." Michael froze, turned his head. Emily was there. Her eyes closed, but her lips moved. "Don't leave me." His trembling foot retreated from the darkness, and suddenly, the forest roared in fury. The trees whipped around, the earth cracked, but Michael clenched the necklace in his fist and shouted through gritted teeth, "Emily, I'm taking you out of here." And as the darkness collapsed over him, Michael found himself back in the mud, gasping for breath. The necklace still clutched in his hand. He looked around. The hooded figures were gone. Helen was gone. Zachary was gone. But on the bark of the trees, one by one, a new word appeared: "We will return." Michael rose to his knees, the necklace in his hand, his eyes fixed on the darkness. The forest was silent, but the battle within him had only just begun. Michael stayed on his knees for a long time. The necklace, clenched so tightly in his palm, had dug into his flesh. Every hot breath from his chest felt like shards of glass in his lungs. Slowly, he raised his head. The forest was still there, but now it seemed aware. The branches of the trees didn't just sway in the wind anymore. They seemed to signal each other. Every step, every squelch of mud, every snapping twig, every whispering leaf spoke to Michael. It isn't over yet. And now he understood. Far ahead, a faint light flickered. Maybe lightning, maybe a sign. But Michael began to walk toward it. His legs trembled, but turning back was no longer an option. The faster he moved, the tighter the trees grew. Thorns cut his legs, roots twisted around his ankles. In the sky, the moon flared behind black clouds, then vanished again. Then, a footprint. Deep, fresh, small, no bigger than a child's. Michael bent down, laid his fingers on the print. It was still warm. "Emily," he whispered. But just then, a shadow leapt out of the underbrush. Michael clawed the branches away from his face and saw him. Zachary. But this wasn't Zachary. His face was warped beyond recognition, black fluid dripping from his chin, empty sockets where his eyes should have been. And he spoke. "Go back." Michael staggered back. "Zachary, I can get you out of here." But Zachary lunged and, like roots bursting from the soil, darkness coiled around Michael from all sides. In a cracked voice, Zachary repeated, "Go back." Michael gripped the necklace tight, made a fist. "I won't go back," he shouted. A scream tore from Zachary's lips, and the roots suddenly retreated. All that remained was his face, half buried in the earth, still staring with hollow eyes. Michael drew a deep breath and pressed on. Soon, the ground sloped downward. He He slid through the mud, coming to a small cave entrance. It was sealed by bark and roots, with a crusted old door. Above it, a single word: enter. Michael wedged his fingers into the cracks, pried the roots apart. The door groaned open, and an icy breath washed over his face. Inside was darkness, the walls lined with ancient lamps that hadn't been touched in years. As he stepped in, the door shut behind him. The forest murmur fell away, replaced by heavy silence. Fingerprints streaked the walls, some tiny, like children's hands, others massive, claw-like. Michael grabbed one of the lamps and pressed forward into the darkness. As he moved down the tunnel, the lamplight revealed faces etched into the bark, crying children, portraits carved into wood. At last, he reached a wide chamber. In the center stood a table. On it, an old cassette player surrounded by dozens of journals, broken toys, and a moldy doll. The cassette player hissed and whirred to life on its own. A voice spoke. "We only took back what was ours." Michael's skin prickled. "What did you take?" he yelled, but the voice continued. "You gave them. They only came back." Michael grabbed one of the journals from the table. Between its pages was Helen's handwriting. Michael doesn't understand. The only way to save Emily is to pass beneath the roots. But down there, it's alive. And everything has a price. Michael closed the journal. His fingers trembled. "What price?" he whispered. In reply, a sinister clicking rose from the depths of the cave. Michael kept moving. The tunnel narrowed, his breath quickened. Roots brushed against the back of his neck. Then another door appeared ahead. This one iron, rusted. A word scratched into it in blood. End. Michael pushed it open. A freezing gust hit him, and there she was, Emily, sitting on a stone, her hair tangled, eyes closed, encircled by roots tightly binding her. Michael's breath caught. "Emily!" He ran toward her, but the roots lashed out, blocking his path. And just then, from the darkness rose an enormous figure. It looked like a tree, but its trunk was made of human bones, its branches draped with the hands of children. And it spoke. "Welcome beneath the roots, Michael." The necklace in Michael's hand turned icy, sharp. "I'm not leaving without her." The creature laughed, a heavy, guttural sound like the rumble of the forest itself. "She is already ours." Michael dropped to his knees, eyes fixed on the Emily glowing faintly in the dark. "No," he whispered. "I'll take her back." He gripped the necklace with both hands and hurled it at the creature. The cave shuddered. Branches split, bones cracked. The creature's scream filled every corner of the cavern. As it recoiled, Michael threw himself into the roots, ignoring the branches slashing his arms. He pulled Emily into his arms. Her body was ice cold, her eyes still shut. Michael looked back to see the creature reassembling itself. Cracks split the cave walls. Light poured through. Michael hoisted Emily onto his back and ran toward the light. He punched the wall, kicked at the roots. Stones gave way. Behind him, the creature hissed. "You will pay the price." Michael raised his head. "Whatever it takes." The cave collapsed. Michael and Emily tumbled into the light. When he opened his eyes, he was kneeling in a clearing. Emily was in his arms. Her eyes fluttered open. From her lips came a single word: "Daddy." Tears streamed down Michael's face. "I'm here." But when he looked up, he saw the trees still watching them, the branches still whispering. On the ground, a new word had appeared: "Your body." Michael drew a deep breath. His whole body ached, but Emily was alive. The forest murmur quieted for now, but Michael knew this was not the end, because something still lay beneath the roots, and it was waiting to claim him back. As Michael carried Emily in his arms, the air filling his lungs no longer felt like the forest's, heavier now, hotter, and sticky with darkness, as though something was seeping beneath his skin. From his chest came sounds like an erratic heartbeat, echoing in his ears. Emily rested her head on his shoulder, but her breath was faint, her skin still pale. When he lifted his head, he realized this was no longer the forest he knew. After it had thrown them into the light, the mouth of the cave had sealed, and the surrounding trees had changed. Massive trunks leaking red light from cracked bark, branches bent into thorny crowns, forming figures that blocked the way. On the ground, letters appeared more clearly with each step. Michael paused. One letter beneath his foot turned red. At that moment, Emily's eyes fluttered open, and in a hoarse voice she said, "Daddy, don't stop," before slipping unconscious again. Michael clenched his fists. "All right," he whispered. "Whatever it takes." Suddenly, he saw something move among the branches. A towering figure, over 2 meters tall, pitch black, thin, elongated. Roots like forked antlers crowned its head. Its face was nothing but darkness. Then, it vanished. Michael could hear his own heartbeat thudding. With each step, he saw more of those watchers. Occasionally, branches drew taut. A shadow passed behind him, always watching. And each time, a new word appeared before him. Walk. A few hundred meters on, the trees ended at a chasm. Before him lay a wide clearing, ringed with steep, mossy rocks, heavy with mist. In the center, a throne woven from tree roots, and upon it sat a motionless figure, its face hidden. Michael approached slowly. The figure suddenly raised its head and spoke. "You forgot what you took." Michael hesitated. "What do you mean?" The voice was deep, as if rising from the earth itself. "Your body is not yours. You took the soul, broke the soil, wounded the forest, and every wound demands a price." Michael's vision darkened. With a sudden roar in his head, images flashed before his eyes. Emily's birth, Helen's gaze, their first camping trip, and the midnight moment Emily vanished. But this time, the images were different. Michael wasn't there. Helen was, clutching the old necklace, bending into the roots. And from her lips, "Whatever it takes, do it." Michael buried his head in his hands. "No, it wasn't me." But the figure slowly tilted its head. "You spoke your wish," the soil heard, "and took what you asked." Michael slowly straightened. "I want her. I want her back." The figure moved as though smiling faintly. "What will you give?" Michael took a deep breath. "Me." The figure chuckled. "Your body." Michael shook his head. "My soul." The figure rose and placed its long, thin hands on Michael's shoulders. At that moment, roots across the entire forest began to shiver. Black ash rained from the sky, and Emily drew a deep breath in his arms, her eyes opening. But just then, Michael's hands, against his will, began to sink toward the roots. Vines burst from his ankles, his arms, his chest. On his back, bark split open like a shell. Michael fell to the ground. But Emily was alive. He found himself in darkness. Neither Emily nor the forest was there, just a pitch-black void. In the center, a glowing table, and upon it, that familiar journal. He stepped closer and opened it. "Michael, the soil does not hate you, but it does not forget. When you do not know what you have taken, it takes everything." He tried to close the journal, but his hands were locked. The voice came again. "You saved her, but the path is longer." Michael screamed, "What do you want?" And from the dark rose a shape, a massive body woven from roots, branches, and shadow. The voice came from beneath his skin. "Your body is ours, your soul is ours, but your heart is still yours. Come with your heart. Complete it with your heart." Michael suddenly opened his eyes in the clearing again, Emily in his arms, but the creature beneath the roots was gone. The sky still burned red. The branches still bent low, but the forest was quiet. Emily's eyes slowly turned to him. "Daddy, we have to leave." Michael wrapped his arms around her. "We're going," he said. He rose slowly, but with each step he felt it. The roots were not letting him go. Thin tendrils brushed his calf. A branch traced his back, cracking like bark. Still, he kept walking, for Emily. Along the way, he could feel the things he had to leave behind. With each step, memories faded. Helen's laughter, the crack in their living room wall, the first time he held Emily's hand, all blurring. At the forest's edge, they found a path, lined with tall, bent trees, each one wearing a white mask, shadows watching through the mask's eye holes. At the start of the path, carved into the earth, a new word awaited: go. Michael looked back into the depths of the forest one last time. "One day I'll return," he murmured, and he stepped onto the path with Emily. At the end of the path, the sky opened. The treetops pierced the clouds, and sunlight spilled over them like gold. As Michael's feet touched the ground, he felt the roots finally withdraw. But the darkness inside him remained. In every breath, every glance, the bark on his back still there. Emily rested her head on his shoulder. "It's over now, Daddy." Michael closed his eyes. "No," he said. "It hasn't even begun." From deep within the forest, the figure on the throne spoke again. He took what he wanted. He paid his price. But the soil is not yet satisfied. And from the bark on Michael's back, a slender root shot down into the earth. A whisper followed. "Complete it with your heart." Michael drew a long breath. He took Emily's hand. "Whatever it takes," he said, and kept walking. As Michael walked with Emily toward the golden light at the end of the path, he began to feel a weight on his shoulders. It was as though the shell on his back sank deeper with every step, roots threading into his bones. Emily's small hand still clutched his, but her fingers were icy cold. The path ahead was blanketed in pure white mist. As they moved through it, tree trunks emerged and vanished. One moment a splintered oak, the next a beech with its roots sunken deep. But each one bore red stains on its bark. Michael stopped. The stains. On closer inspection, they were dried blood, and at the base of every tree a name was carved, all ended with the same letters. El, Gabriel, Nathaniel, Daniel, Raphael. Michael's lips went dry. Slowly, he raised his head and heard the whisper inside him. Paid in blood, sealed by name. As the mist thickened, the shadows grew darker. On either side of the path, tall, horned figures appeared once again, this time still, staring at Michael. One's face was cracked, seeping black light. Suddenly, one stepped forward, its horns crooked, its body draped in moss. It leaned towards Michael and growled, "Give your name." Michael stepped back. "What?" The figure's hands shot from the ground, massive roots winding around Michael's legs. "Give your name." Michael held his breath. "Michael," he said at last, his voice hoarse. The roots recoiled at once. The figure nodded. "Correct. You will pay in blood. The way is open." And the mist rolled away. Michael and Emily came to a wide wooden bridge rising before them. Below lay a deep chasm of black, unmoving water, dead water. On the bridge's planks were painted red symbols, each board inscribed with a word: passage, pay, return, loss, forget. Michael looked at Emily. Her wide eyes glimmered, but there was the faintest smile on her lips. "Daddy," she said. "I dreamed this place." Michael froze. "What?" "When I was with Mummy," Emily said. "At the end of this bridge, she told me, if your father comes, leave him to me." Michael felt ice in his veins. What does that mean? But Emily said no more. She stepped onto the bridge first. When Michael followed, a sharp pain prickled through his feet. With each step, it was as though he walked on thorns, leaving thin cuts behind. When he glanced down, he saw thin roots rising from the cracks between the planks, drinking his blood. With each step, the roots glowed red, and the word P-A-Y etched itself into the boards again and again. Emily stopped at the center. Slowly, she turned to him. "Daddy, it all started with you," she said. Michael stopped. "What?" "When you told Mummy, do whatever it takes. That's when it started." Michael's knees buckled. Suddenly, on either side of the bridge, figures blazing like fire rose. Their horns reached the sky, each holding an axe, striking the boards below. The bridge shook. Michael gripped Emily's hand tighter. "Don't let go." But Emily's face went still, stone-like. "Sometimes, letting go is leaving," she said. At the end of the bridge stood a door, black iron, covered in thousands of tiny handprints. Just as Michael reached for it, a voice called from behind. Helen's voice. "Michael!" He froze, turned his head. Through the mist, Helen walked the bridge in a white dress. Her face was motionless, but black tears streamed down her cheeks. "Helen, you..." She stopped. "I am here, but she," pointing to Emily, "must stay with me." Michael pulled Emily behind him. "No, I'm taking her back. She's my daughter." Helen bowed her head, then raised her hands. All at once, the boards of the bridge turned crimson. Screams rose, hundreds, thousands of voices crying at once. Michael shouted in fury, "Enough!" and he shoved open the iron door at the end. Inside was cold, a narrow corridor lined with stone walls. The walls were carved with faces, Michael's own, Emily's, Helen's, and countless strangers, all staring at him. Emily murmured softly, "Daddy, look." At the center of the walls, a glowing pit opened. Inside, a lake of pure black, and floating at its center, a broken necklace. Helen's necklace. Michael crept closer to the pit. A voice rose from it. "If you take it, it completes. If you don't, it forgets." Michael looked at Emily. She nodded. "I have to," he said, and he reached in and took the necklace. The moment he touched it, everything fell silent. He felt the roots finally withdraw. The shell on his back cracked. The horned figures dissolved into the mist. But Helen still stood there. Her eyes bore into his. "You chose," she said. Michael clenched his fists. "Yes, I chose her." Helen's face split, black light spilling from within. Slowly, she melted away. Michael lifted Emily into his arms and walked down the narrow stone corridor. The faces on the walls had closed their eyes. At the end of the corridor, he saw a faint light. For a moment, hope flickered. But when he stepped into it, he saw something else entirely. An endless forest, even darker, even quieter. The sky painted blood red. Michael stopped. Emily whispered softly, "Daddy, wrong door." Michael closed his eyes, took a deep breath. No, the right price. He dropped to his knees, clutching the necklace in his palm. A thin root shot from the necklace into his hand, snaking under his skin, racing to his heart. Michael gritted his teeth. The sky cracked open. Golden light pierced the branches. Michael let out a deep scream, but did not let go. Then the roots withdrew. He placed the necklace on the ground, and in that instant, Emily's eyes turned fully normal again. She looked up at him with a faint, broken smile. "Daddy, it worked," she said. Michael wrapped his arms around her. "It's over," but from the sky, a whisper still drifted down. "Complete it with your heart." Michael lifted his head. His eyes burned in the darkness. "All right," he said, "with my heart." Michael was on his knees, still breathing heavily. The broken root fragments scattered on the ground were mixed with his own blood. Emily lay motionless in his arms, but she was breathing. Her small chest rose and fell faintly. The world was quiet. For the first time, truly quiet. But Michael couldn't hold on to the peace for long. As the golden light in the sky faded, a cold darkness seeped back into the forest's veins, and the voice began again. At first a whisper, then louder. One more price. The only way through the door is with 2 hearts. 2. Michael raised his head. What are you saying? He growled. You've taken everything. You took my daughter, my blood. What's left? But the forest didn't answer. Emily lifted her head. Her face was pale as paper, her eyes shining like glass. Daddy, she whispered. To open the door. One more of us. Michael's stomach churned. No, I won't do it. But slowly, a figure emerged from the mist. Michael's heart pounded faster. As the figure drew closer, its face came fully into view. Helen. But now her body was completely draped in black branches, her eyes hollow voids. Step by step, she advanced. With every step, cracks opened in the earth, tiny roots bursting upward. Michael, she whispered, you didn't let me go. You gave everything just to remember me. Now, pay me too. Michael pulled Emily behind him. No, I came here to save you. But Helen shook her head. There is no way out. One of us must remain. One of us. Before she finished, Michael felt a blade of cold slice through him. Ahead, a door glimmered in the mist. But on either side, 2 shadowy hands reached toward him. One Helen's, icy, bark-covered but familiar. The other Emily's, tiny, trembling, soft. Daddy, Emily said, if we want to escape, you have to leave one of us. Michael lowered his eyes. Every nerve in his body was pulled taut. How could anyone make such a choice? The words he'd seen on the bridge flashed in his mind. Passage, pay, return, loss, forget. He took a deep breath. Then he raised his head and looked straight into Helen's eyes. Forgive me, he said softly, and he gripped Emily's hand tight. Helen's figure began to shudder at once. She didn't scream, but black smoke streamed from her eyes. Slowly, she dissolved, her roots withering and falling to dust. Michael, she murmured, don't forget me. Then she scattered completely into the black earth. The door widened. Golden light seeped in once more. But this time, the sky opened fully. The forest fell silent. Michael turned to Emily. Are you ready? The little girl nodded. I was always ready. Michael held her hand tight and stepped through the door. On the other side lay an entirely different landscape, a flat expanse, the sky a pale grey, the ground coated in white salt. The air was silent, almost too silent. Michael's ears buzzed with it. In the distance, at the horizon, another door stood. Black iron, but no handprints upon it now. Michael stared at it as Emily asked softly, "What happens now?" Michael drew a long breath. "Now," he said, "we go all the way." But the moment he took his first step, something beneath the salty ground began to move. The earth cracked. Thin, black tendrils rose from beneath the salt, coiling around Michael's wrists. He fell to his knees, gasping. Emily tried to step back, but tendrils snaked up around her ankles too. Michael groaned. No, it was over. But the forest, or whatever it now was, spoke again. No price is ever complete. The second door requires a second heart. Michael looked around. In the midst of the rising roots, another figure appeared. One he hadn't seen before, his own reflection. Same face, same hands. But its eyes were pure black. As the mirrored Michael approached, It stayed silent at first, but there was a mocking smile on its lips. "You can't run," it said. "This path always ends the same." Michael gritted his teeth. "Go away." But the reflection shook its head. "I need someone to stay in your place, and who better than you?" Suddenly, Michael lunged forward and swung his fist at the reflection's face. But it was like punching water. His hand passed right through. The reflection embraced him in turn, and the roots wound them even tighter together. The reflection whispered, "Will you stay for Emily, or save your own soul?" Images flashed through Michael's mind. Emily as a baby, Helen's face, their first fight, his first step into the forest, all spinning in his reflection's black eyes. Michael shouted, "Enough!" He plunged his hands into the root, letting his blood drip onto the salty earth. The roots ignited, the reflection shrieked and was flung backward. The sky split open once more, black light receding, leaving blinding white in its place. Michael stood slowly. His reflection lay shattered on the ground, but its eyes still stared at him. "Don't forget me." Michael took a deep breath and scattered salt over it, closing his eyes. Emily came to his side. "Daddy, is it over?" Michael looked at her. He seemed older now, hands cracked, face lined, but his eyes still held a defiant glow. "Not over," he said, "but we've reached the end." Emily nodded. Together they approached the second door. Carved into it was a single word: end. Michael closed his eyes, took Emily's hand, and pushed. The door groaned open, golden light spilling through, and once again, silence fell. The moment they stepped through the door, the golden light swallowed everything in a blinding flash. At first, Michael could see nothing, only felt a dizzying heat. Then slowly, he realized the ground beneath his feet had changed. No longer stone, but soft, velvety grass. Emily still held his hand, but her face now wore a strange expression, a mix of wonder and fear. "Where is this place?" she whispered. Michael looked around. Before them stretched an endless garden, diamond-bright flowers, interwoven black and white roses, streams trickling over stones, birds suspended in the air, as though the sky itself held them in place. Everything stood still, as though time itself had stopped, and in the very center, a great table. Around it sat 6 figures, dressed in black robes, their faces hidden. Without raising their heads, they gestured for Michael to approach. Michael and Emily walked slowly toward the table. One of the faceless figures spoke. "Welcome, traveler. You paid your first price. The second was taken by force, but the third..." Another figure cut in. "The third must be given willingly." Michael's blood ran cold. "Third? What else? What more do you want?" One figure lifted its head, and when Michael met its gaze, he found himself staring into his own face, but older, worn, spent. "We want your time," his reflection said. "All of it." From a corner of the garden, a faint chime rang out. On the grass appeared a glass hourglass. Its sand trickled down slowly, but Michael saw that each grain of sand was a moment of his life. Emily's birth, his first meeting with Helen, screaming on the bridge, sinking into the roots. His reflection spoke again. "Give your time, and Emily will leave." Michael closed his eyes. His fist clenched. He looked at Emily. Her eyes were wide, her lips trembling. "Daddy, what do we do?" At the far end of the table, one of the figures snapped its fingers. In the corner of the garden, a narrow path appeared. At its end stood a shadowed black door. "If you choose," said one figure, "you don't have to give us your time. You can take that door. But beyond it, there is no return." Michael swallowed. "What's beyond that door?" But no one answered, only silence. Michael's eyes returned to the hourglass. The sand was falling faster now, his memories rushing away. Emily's image growing faint. The longer he hesitated, the more everything slipped from him. Slowly, Michael bent down and took the hourglass in his hands. The glass felt icy, sending a shiver through him. He looked at Emily. "Daddy, don't leave me," she whispered. Michael shook his head. "I won't." He set the hourglass gently in the center of the table. The sand froze in place. His reflection leaned down toward him. "Your time is no longer yours, but your daughter may go." The table split open. The garden's flowers wilted. The birds fell from the sky, and the heavens turned grey. Emily screamed, and Michael gripped her hand tighter. His reflection receded, fading into the corner, swallowed by darkness. One by one, the other figures dissolved. Only the glowing hourglass remained on the table. Emily's body suddenly glowed. A thin light rose from her, pulling her toward a golden door opening at the edge of the garden. "Daddy, come!" she cried. But when Michael tried to step forward, his knees buckled, his legs weighed down. Time no longer belonged to him. Emily stood at the threshold of the golden door. Michael looked at her. He had no strength left, but a faint smile curved his lips. "Go," he said simply. Tears streamed down Emily's cheeks, but she nodded and stepped through the door. It closed behind her. The garden darkened. The hourglass on the table shattered, its scenes of time scattering across the ground like fallen petals. Out of the darkness rose new figures, taller, more ominous, and even quieter than before. Their faces were still hidden, but their gloved hands stretched toward Michael. "Now you are one of us," they said in unison. Michael bowed his head. He didn't speak. He reached out and joined them. Slowly, the garden restored itself. Wilted flowers bloomed again. Birds returned to the sky. The heavens glowed gold once more. But at the head of the table now sat Michael. Before him rested a new hourglass, its first grain of sand just beginning to fall. He whispered, "Everything has a price." In the corner of the garden, a new door opened. Two strangers stepped inside, their eyes wide with fear and desperation, glancing around. Michael allowed a cold smile to spread across his face as he watched them. Silence fell over the path once more. The garden returned to its quiet. Time began to flow again. Michael lifted his head and looked toward the golden door on the horizon. For just a moment, he thought he saw Emily there, turned toward him, hand reaching out. But only for a moment. Then everything was gone. After the door to the garden closed, Michael felt the weight of his new identity settle on his shoulders. Time had been taken from his hands, and in return, he'd been given a silent eternity. But it wasn't over. The chime that began as the golden door shut grew into a tremor that shook the entire garden. The figures in the corners reappeared, but this time, their robes were not gold, but the color of rusted iron, and a biting cold emanated from their bodies. On the table before him, the new hourglass slowly toppled over and shattered. Michael flinched. "What's happening? Why am I still here?" he demanded into the darkness. One of them turned its head and spoke in a deep, echoing voice. The garden was only the beginning. Now it is time to enter the chamber of reckoning. Before Michael, a new path opened. As the garden shrank behind him, the path became a stone-walled corridor. At each step, faint whispers rose from within the walls. At first, he thought he heard his own name. Then Helen's voice. "You left me." Then Emily's. "Daddy, I'm scared." Michael's stomach twisted. With the next step, thin smoke began to seep from the walls. A door appeared, with words etched by a finger across its surface. The Chamber of Reckoning. Michael pushed the door open. The room was dark. In the center stood a lone chair, and sitting in it was Helen, exactly as he had left her in the forest, hair disheveled, eyes vacant. "Michael," she said, her voice cold, "was leaving us here not enough? Why do you still run?" Michael backed away. You were dead. Helen shook her head slowly. There is no death here, only those who remain, and you are one of them now. Michael tried not to meet her gaze. He waited for the door to open again, but it was gone. Helen stood. The walls of the room cracked open, and thousands of branches shot out, gripping Michael's wrists, neck, and dragging him before her. "Look at me!" she screamed. Michael had no choice but to lift his eyes. Her face transformed into a dark pit, and from it rose the voices of others he knew. The room shifted again. Now, Emily stood before him, but much younger than before, maybe 5 years old. Her dress was torn, her eyes full of terror. "Daddy, why did you let me go? Why did you leave me alone?" Michael's throat tightened. "I saved you. I gave my time to save you." But Emily only shook her head. "But you couldn't touch me. You couldn't really hold me." From every corner of the room, her voice echoed. "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." Michael covered his ears. "Enough!" he shouted. At that, the walls of the room shattered, plunging everything back into darkness. The room was now empty. Only a mirror stood in the center. Trembling, Michael looked into it, but the reflection wasn't him. It was older, wearier, more hollow. "You gave everything," the reflection said, "but you saved nothing." Michael shook his head violently. "No, Emily was saved. I sent her through." The reflection leaned in. "Was she? Or did they let her go, just to leave you here alone?" A sharp pain stabbed Michael's chest. At that moment, the floor of the room cracked open beneath him, and he began to fall. He tumbled through what felt like endless void, surrounded by glimmering grains of sand, fragments of voices, screams, and laughter. Minutes later, he crashed to the ground. Slowly, he got up and found himself at the table again. But this time, the table was cracked, broken, covered in mold. There were no sounds from the garden anymore, only heavy silence. A voice spoke. "Are you ready?" Michael startled. Before him stood a figure far more terrifying than the others. Its black robe was pure shadow, and only skeletal hands emerged from it. "Now your duty begins," it said. "The garden is over, but the chambers are always full." Michael said nothing. The figure handed him the old hourglass, but now its sands were black and heavy. As Michael took it, his body felt unbearably heavy. "The first arrivals are on their way," the figure continued. "You will witness their reckonings, and at the end, you will settle with them all." Michael nodded. His eyes slowly closed. From the corner of the garden, a faint mist rose. Out of it stepped two people, a young couple, clinging to each other, their faces pale with fear as they scanned their surroundings. Michael could feel their steps, their fear, their hesitation. He turned the hourglass. The grains began to fall. And then his voice, now echoing from the walls, spoke. "Welcome. Are you ready to pay your price?" The room fell into darkness. Michael lowered his head, stared at the hourglass, and drew in a deep breath. A new scream rang out, then silence. Far away from the garden, somewhere beyond the void, another hourglass shattered. When the mist parted, Michael felt himself inside an entirely different order. In front of him, a young couple clung to each other, trembling. The woman's eyes were wide and wild, the man's lips pale and cracked. The garden's wind coiled around them, and the hooded figures faded in and out of the dim light. A voice rose from within Michael. "Their story begins in your hands and ends in your hands." He was no longer just a witness, but also judge, executioner, and keeper. The black hourglass in his hands began to turn heavily, grain by grain. When the couple broke apart, the man stepped forward. His eyes held defiance, but his voice was hoarse. "Why did you bring us here? What do you want?" Michael instinctively turned the hourglass. The ground cracked open, revealing two paths, one paved with pale grey stones, the other black and gleaming like obsidian. "The choice is yours," Michael said. The woman stared through tears. "What do you mean, choice?" The presence inside Michael answered for him. "One path leads back to your past, the other devours it." The man and woman, hands trembling, chose the grey path. With each step, thin smoke curled up from the stones. At the end of the path, they found themselves at the door of a house. Through the glass they could see inside. Golden light, an old armchair, toys scattered on the floor. When the woman entered, her face froze in horror. On the floor sat a child, herself, hands on her knees, staring at her mother. But the child's face was a broken mask, eyes black and mouth dripping with dark liquid. "Is that me?" the woman whispered. The child lifted its head and grinned grotesquely. "The one you left behind." The woman screamed and ran, but the door slammed shut behind her. The man had chosen his own path. As he walked down the obsidian stones, they splintered underfoot, and dark smoke billowed upward. At the end, he stood before his own gravestone. On it was carved only, "Here lies all the lives he never lived." He dropped to his knees. Behind him came a familiar voice. "The day you buried me, you buried yourself." He turned. Standing behind him was the brother he had abandoned years ago, decayed and hollow-eyed. The man stumbled back, but roots burst from the gravestone, coiling around him, dragging him to his knees as his screams melted into the dark. At the end of both paths, whispers still echoed in Michael's ears. He turned the hourglass over, and everything vanished. The garden fell silent once more. Before him now were only two black stones, each etched with the names of the man and woman. One of the figures leaned toward him. "You have completed the first. 11 remain." Michael drew a deep breath. In the corner of the garden, a new mist was beginning to rise. From it, another silhouette emerged slowly. When the mist cleared, Michael saw a child, 8 or 9 years old, clutching a stuffed bear tightly. The boy raised his head and met Michael's eyes with a stare that pierced straight into his soul. The voice inside Michael spoke again. "This one is the hardest." The child walked silently and stopped before him. The hourglass grew heavy in Michael's hands again. He turned it, and a new path opened, unlike the others. Its floor was blood red, and with each step, faint screams rose from the stones. Michael looked at the boy. "What's your name?" he asked, perhaps the last human part of him speaking. The boy tilted his head and whispered, "I came to take your place." A chill ran through Michael like ice. The boy began to walk the red path, and Michael's legs trembled despite himself. Halfway down the path, the boy dropped the bear. He didn't look back. At the end, they came to a massive mirror. It was clouded, but its reflection was clear. Michael, not the boy, was kneeling there, holding the bear, his face darkened. "How can this be?" he whispered. The reflection replied, "Everyone who comes here becomes a child in the end. This place returns you to where you began." Michael stumbled back, reaching for the hourglass, but it slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. When the hourglass broke, the garden began to tremble. The walls cracked, the figures glanced at each other and silently withdrew. The air turned cold, trees collapsed. Michael could barely stand now. The boy came to him quietly, placed the bear in his hands, and said, "It's yours now." Then he vanished. Michael lifted his head. Darkness closed in completely. He stood alone, the shattered hourglass before him, the bear heavy in his hands. A voice echoed once more. "Now, the choice is yours." Michael looked at the bear, which now weighed like stone. Two new paths opened before him. One disappeared into darkness, the other blazed with blinding white light. Michael walked slowly to the dark path. At its threshold, he stopped, clutched the bear tightly, and looked back one last time. The garden was unrecognizable now. The ground split, walls shattered, figures gone. And more than anything, even the voice within him had fallen silent. When he stepped forward, a scream rose. Then all fell silent again. When Michael stepped onto the dark path, a low moan rose from beneath the ground. He tried to pull his feet back, but it was already too late. The path began to swallow him slowly, black mud creeping up to his ankles as the white light behind him disappeared. From within the darkness came a thin, metallic whisper. "Welcome. The garden knows you." Suddenly, the familiar figures appeared around him. The woman and the man, the child, even others whose names he didn't know. But this time, their faces were shattered beyond recognition, eyes fixed on him. As Michael struggled to free himself from the mud, the stones beneath him cracked, and black fingers reached up to drag him down. At that moment, a bell rang out, and all the figures took one step back. Turning toward the sound, Michael saw an old church door standing there. On it, scrawled in rusted, crooked letters, were the words, "Sin beneath the teeth, truth before the eyes." As he approached, a woman's voice rose from the walls of the church. "Michael." The sound tightened his chest. "Anne?" he whispered. Yes, his former fiancée's voice. But Anne had died years ago, slit her wrists and left him behind. And now, in this darkness, she was calling him. When Michael pushed the door open, a cold, metallic smell swept over him. Inside, the church was lined with rotting pews and broken stained glass, and at the center stood a massive altar. On the altar sat the silhouette of a woman in the dark. Her hair was intricately braided, her lips stained red as blood. She smiled at him. "You left me. That's why you're here." Michael's throat was dry. You died. I tried to help you." The woman rose and walked toward him barefoot across the altar stones. "You didn't help me, Michael. You just forgot your own shame. But the garden does not forget." Her eyes turned black. She placed her fingers under his chin and forced his head upward. When Michael looked at the ceiling of the church, he saw hundreds of bodies hanging there, eyes gouged out. His mouth opened against his will, and a shrill scream escaped him. From beneath the altar, black roots rose, sharp as teeth, coiling around his legs. The woman leaned down and whispered against his forehead, "This is not the garden. This is its mouth, and now it will chew you." Michael collapsed as the roots snapped shut around him like jaws, and the figures slowly began to approach. All of them shouted at once, "Choose, Michael. Take their place, or carry them all." Confused and reeling, Michael stared at the woman's face. How can I carry them?" She lowered her head, lips brushing his ear. "By forgetting." Suddenly, a chest appeared on the altar. When it opened, thousands of tiny shards of glass spilled out, each one holding a memory, his childhood, Anne, his first sin, his first betrayal. Michael shut his eyes, plunged his hands into the chest, and grabbed the shards. At that instant, the darkness quaked. The teeth withdrew, the figures fell silent, and the church began to crumble. But he did not let go of the shards. It was as if this burden was now his choice. The woman looked at him and smiled one last time. "The garden always takes back. Now, it's your turn." Michael pressed the shards to his chest and stepped down from the altar. Behind him, the door closed silently. The garden lay in wait again, silent, cold, its eyes open and watching. When Michael opened his eyes, he stood once more at the garden's center. The mud was gone, replaced by stone. The hourglass sat before him again, repaired yet again. But now there were two more paths before him, one pure white, the other blood red. He picked up the hourglass and turned it. Time began to flow once more. The figures emerged from the shadows, lining up in silence, watching him. Michael drew a deep breath and muttered to himself, "To the teeth that would devour me, I will answer with teeth of my own." And he took his first step. When Michael stepped onto the white path, he felt a strange certainty deep inside that no matter which road he chose, white or red, they would both end in the same place. Still, he walked on. The white stones narrowed beneath his feet, the light around him growing so bright it seared his eyes. At last, the path opened into a vast courtyard. At its center rose a colossal alien flower. Its petals were delicate as glass, its stem woven from what seemed to be human bones, and the flower was breathing. Michael staggered as he noticed what surrounded it. Every figure he had encountered so far. The woman, the man, the child, the shadows, even Anne, all kneeling, hands clasped, silent. Then they lifted their heads. Anne stepped toward him. Her face was now unrecognizable, but her eyes still belonged to her. "Michael," she whispered, "you must open the flower. Let me out. Let all of us out." Michael gazed at the flower. Light leaked from between its petals. When he touched it, thorns sank into his hands, and a scream rang out through the courtyard. "Don't!" a voice shouted. This time, his father's voice. Michael froze. "Don't!" the man said again. "We all chose this." When Michael turned back, he saw their faces slowly shifting. One by one, each figure became him. The woman was Michael. The child was Michael. Even Anne wore his face. Anne's cracked lips moved. "Everyone here is you. All of this was you. The garden was always inside you." Michael's head swam. The flower began to wither, its petals falling like shards of glass. And then, footsteps. Someone emerged from the red path. A man in a black suit, his face hidden, carrying an old book. Without glancing at Michael, he approached the flower and opened the book. "Now," he said, "the garden will finish your story." Michael stared at him in fear. "What does that mean? Wasn't I supposed to open it?" The man raised his head, and Michael saw his own face staring back. "The flower already opened. You will close it." Suddenly, the earth split, and from its depths rose a vast labyrinth of mirrors. In the mirrors, Michael saw countless versions of himself, all his sins, regrets, and fears staring back. The man held out the book. "Sign it. Close the story." Michael took the book, his hands trembling. Turning through the pages, he saw the names of all who had suffered his wrongs. On the final page, it read, "Michael Bennett, the garden's last flower." A pen appeared. He reached for it and signed. The instant his name scrawled across the page, the mirrors shattered one by one. The figures vanished. The flower withered completely. The garden collapsed with a deafening roar until only Michael and the man remained. The man leaned forward, smiling wide. "Well done," he said, and he removed his mask. Underneath was Michael's mother, the one who had died years ago. "You're free now," she said softly. Tears welled in Michael's eyes. "And you?" She shook her head. "We'll always be here. But you may go." Suddenly, Michael was lying on grass. The morning sun was rising. Birds began to sing. He looked around. No trace of the garden. No trace of the figures. In his hand was still the old book, but its pages were blank. Michael rose to his feet. Behind him, carried on the wind, came a final whisper. "The garden has forgotten you." He started to walk. His steps were light. Nothing would ever be the same again. But at last, the story was over, and the garden sank once more into silence.